Just to put things into context, this happened in the United States. تحياتي للجميع في كمان حلقة من بودكاست الميدان. أنا عابد أبو شحاد عبر موقع عرب 48. بس زي دايما قبل ما نبلش ما تنسوش تتابعونا عبر جميع تطبيقات البودكاست، سبوتيفاي، أبل، جوجل، أنغامي، بتلاقونا هناك. اليوم راح تكون حلقة استثنائية، راح نسجلها بالإنجليزي مع المحامية والناشطة ديانا بوتو عن الأحداث الأخيرة في الداخل الفلسطيني في سياق العدوان والحرب على غزة والإجراءات القانونية اللي المؤسسة نازلة تأخذها ضد المواطنين الفلسطينيين في الداخل. ملاحظة أخيرة، إحنا سجلنا الحلقة كم ساعة قبل القصف والمجزرة في مشفى المعداني، المشفى الأهلي في مدينة غزة، ولهذا السبب ما تطرقنا عن هذا الحدث في الحلقة. So, in this episode, we want to talk to Diana Buttu, Palestinian-Canadian lawyer, activist, academic, who between the years 2001 until 2007 worked as an advisor to the PLO on the negotiation team. The main goal of this episode is to shed some light on how the war on Gaza is affecting the Palestinian community citizens of the State of Israel, who since the beginning of the war are forbidden to express their views, feeling, or even showing sympathy towards Palestinians in Gaza, and any view which is not in the Zionist consent might be even seen as illegal. From the beginning of the war, hundreds have lost their jobs, tens are being held detained, all for expressing views whom are not in the general consent and opposing the war on Gaza. To the extent that the police commissioner himself have published a clear threat to anyone who shows any sympathy to Gaza, he won't mind putting them on a bus and sending them to Gaza. Just one last disclaimer before we start. The episode was recorded only a few hours before the horrific bombing of Al Ahli or Al Madani hospital in Gaza, and for this reason we didn't mention the incident during our conversation. Diana, before we go into the details, how are you?
Abid, that's a very difficult question for me to answer now, because we, for the past 10 days, have been going through everything, feeling angry, sad, worried, scared, depressed, sometimes happy that we're alive, hopeful that my friends in Gaza and everywhere are going to be okay. It's a round of feelings that it's not easy to answer even the most basic questions of how are you.
The reason why I'm asking you this question, because for those who don't know, the Palestinian citizens of the state in the past 10 days are surveillanced. Their social media is surveillance. What they're saying in the public sphere is surveillance. And today showing some sort of empathy with the Palestinians is even considered a crime. I don't think we've ever experienced this kind of an oppression where you can't even show solidarity with kids who are being bombed these minutes.
That's right. You know, maybe I should step back a little bit and say, as you put in the introduction, I was born and raised in Canada. And so for me, moving here, this has been a new experience. It's not the experience that I grew up with as a child. And so forgive me, but I hope I can speak a little bit to what the experience is now for Palestinians inside. And I hope I'm not stepping on out of space, because I wasn't raised here. But for me, when living here, you're always made to feel as though your presence is temporary, that you're here by mistake. And because it's temporary and because it's by mistake, you live your life having to carve out spaces, mostly safe spaces, where you're able to speak what you want to say, think what you want to think, and do what you want to do. But that's not always possible for the vast majority of Palestinians who are living here. The vast majority don't have that luxury of being able to carve out that safe space, and instead have to interact and do interact with Israelis, with the state. And it's in that interaction that, because you're always made to feel that you are here temporarily and that you're not safe, that you see this come out the most in these times. And this right now, what we're living, is exactly that. It's the feeling that not only is your presence here temporary, but that temporary period is going to come to an end very quickly. So things like expressing support for Palestinians who are suffering as they're being bombed is not allowed. Just to put it in context for people who may or may not know, Gaza is a tiny little space. It's, for those who know the United States, it's about the size of Detroit. And it's got 4 times the population of the city of Detroit. And the number of bombs that Israel has dropped in Gaza has far exceeded than what the United States dropped on Afghanistan in the course of a year. And the number of kids that Israel has killed just in the past 10 days has doubled the number of kids that were killed in the Ukraine-Russia war. And so when you look at these statistics and you see this, and for me and for you and for others, we have friends there, we have family there. And even if you don't have friends or family there, just on a human level, it begs that we reach out, that we say something, that we do something, that we feel compassion, that we want this to end. And that's what's being banned from us, is that we're not allowed to. We are forced to be in this space where you have to side with the oppressor, with the occupier, with the bomber, rather than with the people who are having bombs drop on their heads. And that part is very perverse, and it's because all of these years our status has really been temporary.
I want to ask you a personal question, and before I do, like, these are the thoughts that are going through my mind throughout these days. First and foremost, as a father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you see the pictures coming out of Gaza, I think it puts us in like a different, if you're a parent, it puts you in a different perspective. Absolutely. Because it's happening today, very close to you, and you also feel under threat. So my question is, you as a mother, how do you feel? Like, in the contents of the future of your son, where do you want to live? If this is a suitable place for us to continue living after these events end?
Yeah, but that's the most difficult question. And I'm going to explain why. There's these eerie similarities. You know, your grandparents survived the Nakba. My grandparents did too, and my father as well. My father was 9 years old in 1948 during the Nakba. My son today is 9 years old. And when I was growing up, my grandmother used to tell me stories about the Nakba and about the fear that they felt and why they fled. And you know, when you're a kid, it doesn't always click. And at times you say, oh no, there's no way I would ever leave. Right? There's a lot of that. And now today, I understand 100% what my grandmother was feeling. I understand exactly what was going through her mind. The feeling of, do we leave? Do we stay? If we leave, what's going to happen to us? If we stay, what's going to happen to us? And am I going to leave? No, I don't see that happening yet. I have the privilege of having the option to leave. I was born in Canada.
You have
I have a Canadian citizenship.
Passport, yeah.
But the issue isn't about me as an individual, it's about us as a community and as a society. And this is the part that's terrifying, is that for me, I see the images of Israel bombing kids. That's what they're doing. They're bombing a refugee camp full of kids. And it not only breaks your heart, but then you think, well, What do you do? Where do you go? How do you protect them? And then there's another element to it, and you'll know this soon when your daughter grows a little bit older. Answering the questions why and what's happening, and having to explain why there are sirens going off. By the way, they were false alarms, the ones in Haifa. But then explaining the sound of the airplanes, explaining to my son that the information that his classmates are telling him that a rocket dropped next to their house, which didn't happen. Explaining to them that that's not correct. Explaining to him what is happening. Explaining to him that we need to have our freedom. That his mom needs to be away, because I'm busy trying to get better coverage. It's all of these things that you think about as a parent, and then and so right now we're in the process of preserving, like self-preservation. I haven't had the ability to look forward and to look ahead and say, what's going to happen in 2 weeks' time? Because what we're seeing in Gaza, yes, will eventually end. That doesn't mean that it's not going to spread to the West Bank. It already has. It doesn't mean that it's not going to spread to us inside 48. And as I said, I have the luxury of having a foreign passport, but it's not just about me. It's about my extended family. It's about this entire community, the community and people that I love that are my family, whether they're related to me or not related to me. And that's the part that's so fearful.
So my question is, I want you just to put in context for the listeners the degree of surveillance that the Palestinians in 48 are going through in these days.
Oh, the level of surveillance is intense. Look, we've always been a community that has been surveilled, right? There's always been surveillance against Palestinians in Israel, and it's been over the years that Israel has not only arrested people for things like poems,
detrimental, yeah,
whose poem had probably been seen by, I think it was 113 people by the time that they had arrested her. Resist, my people resist. And she ended up being thrown in jail for over 2 years. To other people who've had their job, who've lost their jobs as a result of Facebook posts, to people being arrested for them. It's been going on for years. The problem now, of course, is that any level of expression of support or even sympathy for Palestinians in Gaza, it can be subject to this. And there's whole groups out there that are trying to get onto your Facebook feed, your Instagram feed, your Twitter feed, to take screenshots, send it to the police, and so on. There's a couple of Telegram channels that are really quite incredible. One of them is called, translates into Dead Palestinians, and they're posting pictures of dead Palestinians, and some of them, they're being defiled. People are kicking them, urinating on them, you name it, with lots of racist, incendiary comments. Nothing happening to these people. There's another Telegram channel that's called Nazi Hunters, and in this Nazi Hunters Telegram channel, they're putting pictures of Palestinians from 48. And
with their details,
with their name, their address, their phone number, their this, their that. It's all in there. It's all in there. And so you have, on the one hand, the apparatus of the state that goes after people and that has been conducting surveillance operations against Palestinians for many, many years. Of course, they don't seem to use that surveillance when it comes to the internal violence. Somehow it fails when it comes to that issue. But they're using it against Palestinians in Israel to monitor everything that's being said. And you have these vigilantes who are doing the same as well. So it's a whole apparatus that's happening. We've already heard that in the past 10 days, it's not just Dalal who's been arrested, professor, PhD in neuroscience, amazing singer, but there's been about 1,000 cases, if not more, of Palestinians who've either been fired from their positions or who've been suspended from university, sometimes for Facebook posts, sometimes for the simple crime of being an Arab. And so this is the environment that people are living in. Now, there's another element to it as well, which is that the Israeli government works very closely with organizations and companies like Facebook, Meta, and reports are that Meta has been responding positively to 90% of the requests that Israeli activists and the Israeli government have been putting to them to take down posts. So again, you see this what's called throttling, where people's posts can't be seen by other people, or shadow banning, similar situation where people can't at all be seen by their followers. And this is a policy on the part of these major companies, but it's a policy that's coming at the request of the Israeli government. So there's a whole structure, there's a whole system in place there of the government, of working with corporations, and of course these vigilantes who are going around and labeling people as targets. I mean, when you see a Telegram channel that's called Nazi Killers, I don't know why somebody who says Allahu Akbar is considered a Nazi. It still doesn't, obviously they're not. But the whole point is to use this inflammatory language so that it makes it seem as though everything's okay. And that's why you see what you see in the United States with commentator after commentator really using racist language against Palestinians and incendiary, inflammatory language that is designed to fan the flames of hatred.
Wow. I want to put more things into context. Those that don't know, in the past 10 days, the Israeli police slash military has given away more than 10,000 assault rifles in different locations in the north and the south. And like how I feel is like there's a general sense that if any Palestinian citizen of Israel or not a citizen of Israel is out of line, today it's more legitimate to hurt, to shoot, and obviously there won't be any consequences to anyone who might hurt a Palestinian. We're seeing it mainly people who go to their jobs and have to go through an amazing extent of racism. They feel helpless. And I do want to state, I want to see what you think of it, is I think we are the only Palestinian group, other than the Palestinians in the refugee camps in Lebanon, that don't have proper institutions. Like, for example, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in the West Bank, there is some sort of an authority. There is some sort of a public health apparatus, police force, and so on. That it helps, it keeps the community feeling safe. And here I feel we don't have anything. And the most basic institution that should protect us, today you're feeling a lot of animosity against us. How do you think about this intake?
You know, Habib, it's a little bit deeper than that even. You know, this is a community that had to rebuild itself literally from zero. And not rebuild itself from zero, rebuild itself from zero, but in the face of a country that views you as a demographic threat, that views you as a security threat, that, like Smotrich says, the only reason that we're here is because they didn't finish the job in 1948. So you're made to feel as though you are an outsider within your own country, but not just an outsider, like you're the unwanted. So it's amazing when I look around and see that this population that was 150,000 in 1948, today's 2 million, that it's been built up, and it's despite the state, not because of the state. So doctors, lawyers, engineers, activists, neuroscientists, you name it, all has been built up because, despite the state, not because of it. And it's because so much of our energy has been focused on that I don't think that we've really ever focused on this alternative system of protection that you're talking about. And in part, this is why the Israeli state wants to crush us, is because we've done well for ourselves despite the state. And this is why they want to crush us. And so what you see now within the state is, this isn't just a question of them giving guns to Israelis, but for example, in my area in Haifa, there are people who are trying to form militias. They're openly calling for people who have weapons to come together and form what they call a safety group. If it's a safety group, why do you need to have why do you need to have weapons? Why do you need to have all of this? Like, why do you need to be armed? So you're right. We don't have the institutions that are separate and apart from the state. And the political representation that we have right now, you feel it. People are very upset. Some people are saying, no, we shouldn't be calling for protests because there have been mass arrests, and we've already talked about the people who've been losing their jobs and been kicked out of university. But at the same time, there's nobody who's really protecting us as a people who are going to come in when the Israelis do come in and actually serve to protect us. We're very vulnerable. We're left to the state. We're left in the hands of the state, and it's a state that doesn't want us.
And in times where there is a sense of revenge.
Absolutely.
Like when we say state, when we say the police force, at the end of the day, these are also individuals who work in some sort of framework. And the framework right now is based on revenge against Palestinians, against Arabs, and I feel like we don't have any sort of protection, and we're all very vulnerable right now.
We absolutely are. We absolutely are. This is the terrifying thing, is that we're all vulnerable. We have no protection, and there's nobody there who's even looking towards us. It's quite the opposite. People are looking at us as though, you are, you're one step away from the people in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
But on the other hand, and I think it's important to go into the nuances on this, the Palestinian community or communities inside the state are very diverse, and we don't all agree on different political issues. And there are some parts, they're very marginal, very small, but they see themselves part of the state and the Israeli society. And today what I feel is the state is magnifying their voice. So what they say suddenly is all over the news, all over TV, all over the newspapers. And if we express anything that is not in the consensus, we might pay a very heavy price of just expressing feelings, and for people who are being bombed, for kids who are being starved to death, and things that the international community knows about, and they are under the Geneva Convention considered as a war crime. So I think it's going to also have some sort of implication after the war inside the Palestinian community of asking ourselves again, who are we, and redefine our politics.
Yeah, they've been trotting out people. There's a few names I can throw out there. Lucy, whatever her last name, Lucy Herish.
I don't mention their name, just not to give them this platform, or
they're clowns.
Yes.
So Clown 1, Clown 2, and Clown 3 have been trotted out as being the voices of the Palestinian community. And Clown 1, Clown 2, Clown 3 are not representative of the Palestinian community. But what's interesting, Abid, in all of this is even as their voices are being put forward as representative, within the Israeli society, it's kind of like asking twice. Like, for example, and I am going to mention a couple of names, like Mansour Abbas. People are saying, yeah, but he says one thing in Hebrew and he says another thing in Arabic. So no matter how much you say, no matter what you say and how much you say, you have to repeat it over and over and over again. And even then, they're never going to believe you. Mm. And this is the way that the Israelis are looking at this community. So these are the models. And if you don't agree with what these 3 or 4 models have said, then somehow you can be eliminated. And even those 3 or 4 models, we have to question them once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, because really deep down inside, there's still something in there. There's that drop of Arab blood in them that is going to make them somehow sympathize with a dead child in Gaza. But it's that fact that we don't get to be humans. We're so dehumanized that we don't get to have the aspiration to be free. We're so dehumanized that we don't have the aspiration to not live under military rule. We're so dehumanized that we don't have the aspiration to not live in a cage. We're so dehumanized that these same individuals that you're talking about, they won't sympathize with Palestinians or express outrage over what Israel's doing, because they've also internalized that dehumanization.
Diana, you had many amazing appearances on international news channels. I want to tell you why I started the pod with asking about your feelings, because when we go on international news agency, it's as if we're talking about statistics and numbers. And then you're asked all kind of political analysis, and people underestimate that we have feeling, though. This is why it was important for me to ask you about your feelings, and also not only as a Palestinian, but also as a mother. But I do think it's important to talk about the international media. The first few days, it felt as if there was this attempt, and correct me if I'm wrong, of this attempt to manufacture consensus of favoring Israel and dehumanizing Palestinian and Palestinian sufferers, and taking things out of context, as if there isn't any occupation, as if Gaza is some sovereign state. And I felt that there was some sort of a backlash from the international community, activists, student bodies, and so on. And I feel like because of this backlash, things are starting to change. I do want to ask you, how do you feel about that? And how do you think the international media's coverage right now during like the last 10 days?
The international media should be ashamed of themselves. There's so many things that I could say about it. I'll begin with the basics. As a Palestinian, when you're brought on to any of these major networks, it's like you have to pass a test, a litmus test, if you are human enough. And so always the first question is about condemning Hamas. And it's very, it's dehumanizing.
It's like a test, as you said.
It's a test. You know, are you worthy of the 3 minutes of time that I'm going to give you? Is the first thing. But what's amazing is that they never turn around ever to an Israeli and say, do you condemn the Nakba? Do you condemn the military occupation? Do you condemn the fact that you've put these people in an open air cage for 16 years? Do you condemn the killing of children? And the Israelis will, say, oh, all life is precious. Imagine, if when Palestinians say, oh, all life is precious, they continue to hone in, like, do you condemn? Do you condemn? As though I'm the person who is either representative of Hamas or who carried out anything. And it's that level of dehumanization. Like, you can just switch us. You can put Diana, or you can put another person, or you can put another. Like, we're all interchangeable. It doesn't matter. That's dehumanization. And it starts there. But then it got even worse, Abed. It got even worse as time passed, because not only was there lacking context in terms of the occupation and the siege on Gaza and the Nakba, but there was also lacking context in terms of what Israel has been doing all of this period of time, and that Gaza is not a state. It's not a state. Lacking context in terms of the size of it. Lacking context that 80% of Gaza's population are refugees. 50% are under the age of 18. This is 50% who never have voted in their lives. If you're under the age of 30, you never voted for Hamas.
It's also 50% unemployment rate.
Exactly. These are all the things that they completely conveniently ignored. But then it gets even worse. The Israelis came out with a whole host of lies. There's been an very active Israeli propaganda campaign that's been going on. And in this active propaganda campaign, they have been throwing out things like allegations of rapes, allegations of beheadings, you name it. And I was actually on an interview when I saw this being manufactured. I literally saw this whole thing manufactured as I was in an interview. The one American representative came forward and made up this stuff, and you could see that he was lying through his teeth as he was on television. The host took whatever he said and then turned it to me and started asking me questions, even though there was no proof of this.
There's no fact checks on what the Israelis say, but there is
nothing
precise fact checks on everything you have to say.
On everything we had to say. It then gets worse. Then that was on Sunday. By Tuesday, President Biden is then repeating these same allegations. He said, I never thought I'd see pictures of beheaded babies. Well, you didn't, because there aren't any. But it was only when people had to push back and demand that there be clarification that he issued a clarification. Now, that's not a typo. It's not like it's a spelling error in his speech. It's a whole process of dehumanizing Palestinians and turning every Palestinian into, as they put it, ISIS. And that's why just in the past couple of days, there was one young little boy, 6 years old, named Wadia, who was stabbed 26 times by his landlord. Landlord is Jewish. Because of this incitement. His mother is also stabbed. The little boy died.
Just to put things into context, this happened in the United States.
His mother's in the hospital still. Another case in Detroit of people, one guy uttering death threats and the police having to come in. This is all the result of this propaganda and dehumanization.
I felt as if the Western media is pushing for this whole theory of class of civilization. So it's us against them. And they attacked us, and now we have to condemn, and we have to send our military to protect Israel. And without even reflecting on what's happening on the ground.
Absolutely. We have 3 correspondents I could just name off the top of my head. One of them, Sarah Sidner from CNN, who repeated the same claims that Netanyahu made without ever fact-checking it. Another, Nick Robertson, who repeated the same claims.
I think Sarah...
She apologized. Great, she apologized. She didn't lose her job. She didn't lose her job. If this had been the Palestinian president that had made the same allegations of against Israel, and she repeated it, she'd be fired. She apologized, and at least I take comfort. I don't know. I'm happy that she apologized, but more should have happened. We have Nick Robertson from CNN repeated the same allegations. Richard Engel from NBC has been standing as a stenographer, a person who's just repeating all of the Israeli claims. IDF says, we cannot verify, but IDF says. Then why are you reporting it? If the IDF says, that doesn't mean that it happened. And even in other newspapers, you've seen where they say, Netanyahu says, but no confirmation. I remember very well, very painfully, very, very, very painfully well. When my friend Shireen Abu Akleh was murdered, she was shot in the back of the head with a bullet while she was wearing her flak jacket, her press jacket, and she was wearing a helmet. And she was shot in the back of the head. And this was done in front of people. There were eyewitnesses. Those eyewitnesses are Palestinian journalists. Even in the face of video evidence, eyewitness reporting journalists, and other witnesses who were not journalists, but also eyewitnesses, the news media went crazy to demand investigation after investigation, to demand the bullet, to demand everything, because they didn't want to run a story that said that the Israeli army killed Shireen Abu Akleh. And so you see the way in which even in death, Shireen was dehumanized. And even when it comes to the way that this attack is happening, that Palestinians as a whole become dehumanized, that the rules of fact-checking get thrown out the window, the ways in which the war drum, so to speak, keeps beating. And you hear interview after interview, press statement after press statement. I have yet to hear, for the first 2 days, I didn't hear the word occupation uttered, except by the people who were responding.
You know what's sad about this whole situation? I think that if you see yourself as a moral person, I think the most natural thing to demand right now is to stop the war.
Absolutely.
And not to incite. Because things might escalate to places that are very dangerous for many people, for millions of people in this region. And the movement of the militaries, and the statements that are coming from world leaders, I think we should all be very afraid. And I think you have to be like if you're a moral person, I think this is like ABC to demand to stop the war and to work for a just solution. And I'm surprised that people from the left and people that see themselves as moral beings keep shuttering the same argument that Israel has the right to defend itself.
But it's not. It's defending a military occupation, and it doesn't have that right to defend that. Look, this is the problem: is that Israel wants for itself what it doesn't want for others. It doesn't want for others what it wants for itself. But they don't view that Palestinian, again, it goes back to dehumanization. They don't view it that Palestinians have a right to do anything other than lie down and be victims and be wiped off the earth so that they can have a Jewish state. I hate to be so callous, but that's what it's about. There's there's this theory about this might be a little bit too much for too much for the podcast, but there's this theory about frontiers and ghettos. And what the frontiers and ghettos theory is that when there are people who are living in a ghetto, you use less military force with them. But when it's a frontier, you can use as much as you want. So if you look, for example, at what Israel did in 2006 against Lebanon, they inflicted a lot of force, a lot of violence on Lebanon. And if you look at what they've been doing in Gaza since the complete closure of it, but even since before that, since they completely blocked it off, it's all massive bombing campaigns. Whereas if you look at what they do in the West Bank and inside 48, it's a lot of like policing. And it's very interesting because inside 48 and inside the West Bank is where the most damage can be done. It could be the most damage can be done to Israel from inside 48, inside the West Bank. But yet it's a different way of policing people. But now in the Israeli mindset, it's not just that Lebanon has become a frontier, Gaza has become a frontier. And when that happens, it's that you can do anything to these people because they're on the other side. So you can bomb Lebanon to, you can obliterate it. You can bomb Gaza to smithereens because they're on the other side. And this is what's happened with Israeli thinking is that that's why you hear somebody like Herzog say there are no innocents in Gaza. So a baby who's born 2 days ago is not considered an innocent. It's this level of dehumanization, and it's shocking to me because when I was a student, and I still do, read a lot of literature about genocide, not just the Holocaust, but genocides in general. And it's always the same way. They happen in the same way. It begins with dehumanization. It continues with sets of laws that are done in order to protect the certain community. And it goes to what we're seeing now in Gaza. So when you see them say, no food, no water, no electricity, no fuel supplies, that's genocide. That's genocide.
Hope we don't see that.
Inshallah.
The activist / academic / journalist and writer Diana Buttu.
Thank you.
And lawyer, if I forgot to mention that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Abid. Thank you.
I wish we have done this in better terms and better days.
Inshallah. I hope so too.
So this was our first attempt to record the podcast in English. Please tell us what you think and if we should continue every once in a while to reflect on what's happening in Palestine, the West Bank, 48, and in Gaza.